Hi, welcome back to 1-Bit Favorite Dreams. In this video of my grand tour of my retro setup in my office, my main goal is to explain everything I did with vintage computer, video capture, and routing. Here's a sneak peek in this diagram I made. I know there's a lot to unpack, and I know you're thinking about this meme. Hopefully, if I go over it step by step, focusing on what my needs were and how they developed over time, how I faced issues and what cheap solutions I found to overcome them, then I promise my esteemed viewer, you'll at least appreciate where I come from and how I arrived at this spaghetti. Of course, I'm sure some people out there found better solutions, planned this all in one go, own more expensive gear, and can do more. And you know what? That's fine, and I'd love to hear some of your solutions in the comments. Everything I recommend here is relatively cheap and modest, and is still mostly available. This is my own path here, and I wanted to share this with you. This is the second video of my grand tour of my setup where my retro gear takes a good amount of desk space in my home office. In the last video, I showed off what I do with vintage MIDI gear, including keyboards, sound modules, and how it connects to my old compact Macs. See below for a link to that if you missed it. But for now, let's go back to my video signal setup. The first order of business was to install a RGB to HDMI to my vintage compact Macs and get a HDMI output. The RGB to HDMI, in case you don't know, is a Raspberry Pi device with an extra board, a hat, plugged to it, and can take digital TTL video signals and convert it to the modern world of HDMI. Another variant can deal with analog signals, but I don't need that. It has its limits in the number of colors and resolution it can do, and it aims to please the early to late 80s classes of computers first and foremost, which means it's more than powerful enough for our humble needs of 1-bit monochrome graphics from the old compact Macs. I made a video not too long ago on how I wired such a device to my Macintosh SE30. Go check that out if that vital part intrigues you. Again, link below. So this first use case is accomplished with a single HDMI video cable. Connects to a simple cheap capture USB dongle, and you're done. My modern PC is perfectly adequate to capture this inside OBS, and many other options could also be used, since the dongle kinda acts as if it was a USB camera feed. This right here could satisfy a need for many people, and of course, the biggest hurdle is installing the RGB to HDMI. With this, I can produce content about black and white software running exactly as intended from my Mac Plus or Mac SE30, depending if it's something from the late 80s, early 90s, or something truly ancient like from middle of the 80s that's not compatible above A+. However, here I encounter my first issue. Capturing video through a dongle can add some lag. If I'm to do a live streaming while I'm playing an action game where reflexes are important, such as Dark Castle or Crystal Quest, or any of the arcade-like games found on the Mac, viewing the action from a capture feed makes it very difficult to react when you have multiple hundreds of milliseconds of lag. The solution I found was to split the video signal and send a second branch to a modern LCD without sacrificing what keeps on going to my modern PC. These signal doublers are active and need external power and can be found on Amazon or AliExpress. Make sure it's a 1 in, 2 out signal repeater. One branch going to a LCD screen is immediate and carries close to no lag, and that's what I'm looking at when playing a game. The other branch still goes to my PC to be captured, and the lag associated with that path doesn't matter anymore. By now, we've achieved a level that would make retro gaming streamers very happy, and they'd be able to go on and be successful on Twitch or YouTube. If and only if there's an audience for it. To recap, I'm using one active repeater and I'm up to just 3 HDMI cables so far. Was this the end of the project for me? Well, you know the answer, of course not. Parallel to all of this, I was developing a bench area right beside my desk where I set up a digital USB microscope that I use for soldering and maintenance. I simply plugged it in my work laptop usually. That inexpensive tool acts like a macro camera really. But I wanted this to be more permanently tied to my bench and have a dedicated screen for it. I know there are all-in-one units out there, but this was a bit before they were massively available and within reach. I repurposed this small 8-inch monitor from AliExpress. The image isn't great, the size is pitiful, but it has an incredible range of input options, including HDMI. So I ended up connecting the digital microscope to a Raspberry Pi 3A. The cool thing about this is that with the press of just one button, it powers the Raspbian OS, auto-launches a webcam viewing window, and puts it in full screen. So let's power it up. As you can see, this is live. Can move this around, zoom it. And close it down with one press. Even the screen is powered by USB-C via the Raspberry Pi. But of course, I'm using an external USB hub. It's not fast by any means, but while it loads, I just prep the water and supplies I need for soldering. So, the map now looks like this with this new independent system. But wait, a new need developed. What if I wanted to capture soldering footage for my channel? The solution is simple: put a passive switch and let there be a choice between capturing the feed from a Mac or from the scope. This makes the HDMI cable count increase by 2 for a total of 5 cables. But it immediately creates a new problem that has to be solved. Did you notice it in my diagram? If you saw my little scope monitor turn blank, that was it. I'm sending the signal to my modern PC for capturing purposes, and I'm no longer seeing anything close to the bench. I could route it to my lagless secondary monitor, but it's too far from the action. I also don't want to get another active video repeater because I wanted to limit the number of devices that require power here. So here we go. A second passive HDMI switch right before sending the lagless video signal to my big LCD monitor. Instead, create a second option at this spot to send back the signal to my bench area. This is quite the roundabout trip for the video feed that comes from my microscope, but you know what? It just frigging works. And it doesn't compromise that capturing because this is still being done without batting an eye in this branch. If you want to see some footage I've done with my scope, I'll put some links below. The scope really is not something to write home about, but it's served me well for through-hole and surface mount stuff alike. It's what I used to build my own PicoGus version 1. It's what I used to repair a few Mac logic boards, and at something like $40 US. It's within reach for most people who are on the fence about getting soldering equipment. Feel free to use a screen that's bigger than 8-inch though. The only reason I'm using this and not bigger is just because I happen to have that in my collection prior to all of this. So that should satisfy me, right? I happen to own a F256K from Phoenix Retro Systems, and I'm making videos about it on my secondary channel called Any Bit Fever Dreams, link below. It's a 6502 based new retro imagined machine and has wonderful combination of capabilities. Dual SIDs and an FPGA, Yamaha OPL FM synth, capable of running a crazy amount of multiplex sprites, so I need to bring its signal to my setup. One more passive switch, 2 more HDMI cables for a total of 9. This also makes it possible for me to plug in my 486, outputting its VGA signal to HDMI using a cheap converter. Some people use VGA capture cards or dedicated boxes such as the discontinued Extron or the very pricey European-made OSSC. None of these appeal to me, and you know what? On a VGA maze. With all of this trouble with realizing this HDMI literal maze, I will not double up with a VGA maze. While the video quality is not so great with this adapter, it handles the weird dust resolutions great. Unfortunately, these things are sold by tons of Chinese companies which do the whole song and dance of popping up in and out of existence, and they are not made equal. There's a long forum thread on Vocons that now sits at 18 pages that discuss the merits of many people's hunts for these. The last thing I can easily add is to connect a WiC since it also outputs VGA. This is a weird small PC compatible that acts roughly like a Pentium 2 at 233 MHz that I soldered and assembled myself back in 2021. I'll eventually make a video about it on my secondary AnyBit channel. So I'm not tying these last 3 devices to even more passive switches because I don't use them enough for video capturing to justify it. So my 3 passive switches are all concentrated here on my desk for easy access. Right now it's set up to send the scope signal to the bench LCD, the little screen I showed up. So if I want to change things around, I want to send my Mac Plus to my secondary monitor, I have to switch the external output, and then I have to select the Mac instead of the whatever is on the bench. And we can see the output here. If for some reason I want to goof around and send the Mac Plus, which is right there, to the little LCD screen, I can do that as well. I don't know why, but I absolutely can do this. So just switch here. So an even smaller screen than the original one from the Plus. Amazing. We've almost reached the end of the journey here, but one last thing. I replaced the original dongle with a 60 Hz one that I found a few years later. If you're curious about what difference they make, I captured some footage out of the black and white game Titan. You can sort of see the jagginess and the movement of the ball at 30 FPS. It becomes much more pleasant at 60 FPS. Look at how more fluid this is. Thank you very much for watching. Hopefully I've been able to inspire you on developing a use case similar to mine. I'll see you in the next video. I'll leave you with some footage from my Mac Plus running Archon, showcasing the difference between 30 and 60 FPS. Enjoy!